Welcome, Rhonda. Welcome, Michelle. Glad to see you. Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here with us today. We're glad to have many of you here already registered and present with us. Welcome. When we are in our full group portions today, we will be keeping everyone muted. It's nothing personal. We just want our presenters to be able to speak without distractions from a barking dog or an inquiring child or something like that in the background. We will have time for questions and answers near the end of today's session. You might want to just jot down your questions as they come to you during our time together. Hold them until the Q&A. Another option is that you are welcome to type your question into the chat feature here in our meeting today. And I'll be picking those questions up later and getting them to our presenter for her to tackle them. As you've already noticed, this session is being recorded, as will the other 4 sessions. You, having registered, you're able to attend all 5 of the sessions. If that's able to work on your own calendar, we will make the recordings available afterwards, and they'll be available not only to those who've registered, but they'll also be available to anyone who visits our website or sees the links in our Facebook posts. I suggest you keep yourself in speaker view today rather than gallery. That way you'll be best able to see the content of the slides that our speaker will be using. Do you know the original and ancestral lands upon which you currently reside? If you do not, I'm going to provide something in the chat. It's a link to a website, a Canadian website, where you can insert your zip code and then find out who originally lived on the lands in which you currently reside. And you are welcome to place that information in our chat as we wait to begin. Welcome to those who are just joining us now. So to repeat a couple of those early announcements, when we're in our group sessions, we will have everyone muted except the speaker so that we are not distracted by other sounds that are happening and maybe in the background in our homes. We will have time in breakout sessions, and of course, then you will be unmuted and you can have conversations with each other based on some questions that our presenter has prepared for you. We will have time for Q&A at the end. There's basically three ways that you could advance a question. You could write it down on a piece of paper with you and have it available to either ask verbally or throw it into the chat when we get to the Q&A time. You're also welcome to use the chat feature as the question pops up in your mind. Throw it in there, and then I will gather all those questions up for our host and presenter today. And then the third option is when we get to the Q&A time, you can use the raise hand feature and you'll be able to voice your question to our presenter. As you notice, we're recording this session and we will be recording the other 4 in this series and afterwards make them available. They'll be available from our website. They'll be on the Women of the ELCA YouTube channel. And you are welcome to add into the chat the names of the original and ancestral tribes upon whose land you currently reside. We're so thankful to see so many of you here today, and I'm sure some others will be joining us in a couple of moments. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement. The churchwide offices of Women of the ELCA are located on the original and ancestral lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, Ho-Chunk, and Sioux people. We give thanks for these tribal nations, and we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of the various regions across the whole country. We recognize and honor all Indigenous siblings, supporting the resilience and strength they show worldwide. And now it's my pleasure to welcome today's host. Actually, Jenny will be hosting all of our 5 sessions, but she's also presenting today. Our host is Jenny Norris Peterson. Jenny.
Welcome, everyone. It's such an incredible pleasure to be with you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us on this Saturday. And I hope you can join us also for the next 4 Saturdays when we unfold the sessions to come in this series. The whole series has the theme, God's Gift of Money, Stewarding Money Wisely. We hear so much from women that women want more information on this topic, and we'd like to have it grounded in our faith. And so we've taken both of those things very seriously as we've dreamed about what the content might be for this. And I hope that you find it interesting and helpful as you go about living your own financial lives and your life in fullness as a steward of time, talent, and treasure. I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about my background. In the very first 4 years of the ELCA, I was working in the churchwide offices as editor-producer of Stewardship Resources. Later in my career, I became a major gift officer and have served several Lutheran institutions: Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota, Luther Seminary, Lutheran World Relief, and also St. Olaf College. So I've had the chance to visit with hundreds of donors across the country. And of course, they've shared a lot with me about their financial questions, but also their desire to make a difference through their giving. It's been a joy to do that. Along the way, I felt called to focus my consulting career, which I'm focused on now, on women's philanthropy. So I go across the country speaking, leading workshops, and giving keynote speeches, as well as writing articles on this topic of women's philanthropy. So it's such a joy to be with you today as we gather together as part of the Women of the ELCA. I'm actually a member of Miriam's Circle at Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in St. Paul. So welcome everyone. Again, thanks for being here. I'd love to know a little bit more about who's here. And so I wonder if we could have our first poll popped up here on the screen for everyone so that you have a chance to use your mouse and click in on the answer.
Can I ask if, oh, it failed to launch. Let me try again.
Thanks, Linda. Oh, I see it now. It's
Thanks.
right here. It's just a quick poll to find out what ages of people we have in clusters as we're participating together today. So just a single choice. Click on one. I see answers starting to come in. It looks like we've got 19 responses so far, up to 21. So just click right on your screen in order to let us know in what age group you fall.
And then actually, Jenny, the second question is present as well. So people are answering that right now too.
Wonderful.
We'll see all the results from both the first and the second question when we have 25 of 33 have responded. Are we ready to end the polls?
I don't see the second one on my screen, so why don't you guide us through that part, Linda?
Okay. Well, 25 people have answered it already. I don't know if you, there should be a little bar on the right of the little pop out that you see, and it allows you to move up and down on the screen. And that's how you can get to the second question.
Good
So I
to
think,
know. So are we
yeah,
getting more answers there on the second question?
yeah, we have
We thought that
25.
would help us shape
Good.
some of the material to come over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
So we do encourage you to answer because that'll just help us know more about what you need to learn.
We're having a little problem here with, let me try this.
It's showing up for me, Linda. Are you ready to end the poll?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And do we want to share the results?
Yes, please.
Oh, that's fun to see. And I hope some people maybe marked more than one if more than one answer fit you.
Jason, can you scroll down so we can see the second question, the answers to the second question? Or maybe I can just do that.
I scrolled down using that gray bar on the right, and I see most of our participants have some knowledge about financial terms and investments, but are eager to learn more. A few are already very financially savvy, but not many have a well thought out financial plan or an estate plan. So that definitely leaves us a lot of room for discussion and education and growth in those areas through our series. So thanks for letting us know where you are on those questions.
Thanks, Jason. I think we can close that down and Jenny's ready to move forward.
Yeah, I'll move on with the rest of our program today. Thank you.
So it only seems appropriate that we ground our whole series in teachings from the Bible about money. We're starting out with that. And so today, as a group, we'll be looking at some of the teachings from the Old Testament and the New Testament about giving, about saving, and also about spending. I just love this particular verse from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. It really is teaching us that we are God's. God has created us and everything around us, our possessions, the world itself, our very being. Everything that we could name in the world really comes from God. And so that is at the root of our stewardship. I wanted to share with you a quote that I especially love from John Westerhoff III. Stewardship is what we do after we say we believe, after we give our love and loyalty and trust to God, from whom each and every aspect of our lives comes as a gift. God is the original giver. God is the great giver. And I think we need to continually remind ourselves that everything in our care comes from God. When we have that sense, it gives us this tremendous gratitude. God gives everything to us and asks us to give back in return. And it just creates this beautiful flow. It's a sense of love and giftedness that we have from God. So let's take a look now at some of the verses in the Bible that really have to do with giving. And one of the practices that we're familiar with is tithing. This is a quote from the 27th chapter of Leviticus. All tithes from the land, whether seed from the ground or from the tree, are the Lord's. They are holy to the Lord. All tithes of herd and flock, every 10th one that passes under the shepherd's staff, shall be holy to the Lord. So tithing is really about giving 10% of what we have to the Lord or for God's purposes in the world. It can be through the church or through Christian ministries. But it's that sense of giving 10% first to God as a sign of gratitude and love and trust. I wanted to take a moment here to introduce you to my dear friend, Rebecca Jorgensen Sundquist, because she has quite a tithing story to share with all of us. I heard this years ago when we were working together as major gift associates at Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. It astounded me then, and I think you'll be astounded too. So, Rebecca, welcome to this meeting today, and we'd love to hear your story.
I don't think I had any idea how my relationship with Elvina would influence my stewardship and my philanthropy. I met Elvina when I was on the third day of a new job at Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. I think one of the reasons I was hired was that there was a whole office of guys in the development work, and many of the single women they were visiting were not comfortable having men come into their homes. So I toddled along to a gathering at a local Lutheran church for a presentation that Friday. Dwight, my boss, told me that my assignment was to get to know Elvina. She was 91, never married. No one thought she had resources or interest, and that she would be a good start for a brand new development officer like myself. We struck up a conversation. She invited me to visit her at her apartment the following week. I wasn't over the threshold of her very tiny apartment when she told me, Rebecca, I'm going to give $100,000 to Lutheran Social Service today. So I thought, well, this is fun. This is a good day. We had a lovely visit. We worked through the details, and I headed back to the office. Little did I know that the guys had a bet that I would come back with $50. Elvina shared her story and her journey with me. She had been a librarian in a small town in southern Minnesota, and she had some health issues, so her doctor suggested that she find a new career. She went back to school, she became an accountant, and she landed a job at 3M. She was one of the only female accountants on the staff. Elvina loved the work and she loved her colleagues. Soon she had the opportunity to purchase 3M stock. Strong in her faith, she prayed about it and she asked God to help her put the money together to purchase the stock with a promise that she would give the money back to the church at the end of her life. Elvina kept her promise. She told me, Rebecca, the stock split and it split and it split. She had more money, she had more wealth than she ever could have imagined accumulating. At the time, I was a single mom with 2 kids soon to be ready for college. I didn't have a lot of brilliant ideas on how I was going to fund college education for 2 very smart kids. As Elvina and I spent more time together, and now our relationship was more of friendship than professional, she suggested that I try tithing. I was doubtful, as you can imagine. I was fully aware of biblical teaching about tithing. I knew my parents were tithers, although they didn't talk about it very much. I felt like it would be like jumping off a cliff, and it was. And I've never looked back. I started noticing how my money seemed to stretch further than it had before. I experienced uncanny coincidences with money that would show up that I wasn't expecting, or expenses that turned out to be a lot less than I anticipated. They were like God winks. It was like God was saying, Rebecca, trust me, I've got this. I was promoted to a new job. I had more responsibility and a bigger paycheck. I kept up the tithing. Still, more coincidences were happening. I decided to keep a stewardship journal to record my observations about money, and I was stunned. There is a saying, you can't outgive God, and I'm here to tell you it's true. I was living it. My kids made it through college, no debt. I have peace about money, and I've never looked back. I believe our God is a God of order. I think He wants us to have our finances in order. I think He wants our obedience, and I think He wants us to be generous. Elvina was all of those things. I learned so much from her, and I don't think she had any idea how she impacted my life. She was my role model. Thanks be to God for Elvina.
I wanted to mention that Rebecca is a development consultant today, helping a number of not-for-profits, including Norway House in Minneapolis, but she also is the campaign advisor for the Women of the ELCA campaign that's underway right now, 2122, working to raise $1 million for Katie's Fund. Well, we'll now look at another giving practice in the Bible, and that's first fruits giving. It really is impossible to tithe without doing first fruits because we can get so carried away with the spending, or some people get carried away with the savings, really putting a great deal of money into savings or investment accounts, that those two aspects of our financial life can sort of grow exponentially and squeeze out what's available to give to God. And it's so much easier to carve out a full 10% when it's the first 10% that just comes right off the top. And I thought it was interesting that there's some verses in the Bible that talk about first fruits giving. Here's one from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruit of all your crops. I loved finding this farming picture to put with this slide because some of us are farmers, and I know I grew up on a farm in central Illinois. But for many of us, our crops are not necessarily farm crops. Maybe we have a business and the product is something entirely different. Maybe we're selling table linens or china. Maybe someone else has a store that sells purses. And so crops can really have a much wider meaning than simply the corn and beans that our family was growing, or the wheat that you can see here. Think about what that means, the first fruit of your crops. For some people, the crops, meaning the income, may simply be a stream of pension income or annuity income or withdrawals from a retirement account. It may be a variety of things that contribute to your income for the year. But no matter what your total income is, it's possible to think about what is that first gift that goes to God. And I think it's wonderful that we're encouraged to think about this with our giving in the Bible. It helps us be more generous. So one of the other models for giving is something that comes from the New Testament, where Jesus was talking with a rich young man. And this rich young man asked Jesus how he could get into the kingdom of heaven and said, I'm following all the commandments, and kind of wanted to know, is this enough? Jesus looked at him and loved him. I just love that first line. This is from Mark chapter 10. Jesus looked at him and loved him. They're just meeting in this moment, but Jesus sees him fully. He knows how faithful he is. He knows that he struggles with his money and what to do with it. And he loves him first of all. But then he responds, one thing you lack, he said. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me. But this is such a daunting ask. The rich young man goes away and is sorrowful because he can't find it in his heart to sell everything that he has. I know I would find that very hard, to sell everything in my name right now. It's very daunting. What are we to make of that? I think the takeaway for me is that Jesus needs to come first. That as we think about our giving, Jesus needs to hold the first place. And when we give Jesus the first place, what does that mean for our giving? It may move us to a much more generous slice than we've been sharing in the past. Well, one of the other famous stewardship stories features Zacchaeus, who was a sinful tax collector and took advantage of people. We read about Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19, verses 8 and 9. And again, Jesus has a powerful effect on Zacchaeus. When he sees him, Zacchaeus is just so eager to get a look at this Jesus. And he stood there and said to the Lord, after he had seen Jesus and felt the power of his soul and his teaching, Zacchaeus suddenly felt great repentance and said, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. I think this is so intriguing that Zacchaeus is suddenly moved from a life of sin to just offer up to Jesus half of his possessions, and even more than half, because he says if he's defrauded anyone, he'll give that person back 4 times as much as he took from them. So it's a very significant gift, very significant, but it's not everything. So I just point this out because it shows that we have different models for giving in the Bible. But the thing that stands out above all is just the enormous sense of generosity. And we see that again in the familiar story of the widow's mite. The widow had so little to give, and yet she gave everything. This is from Luke chapter 21. As Jesus looked up, he saw rich people putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for all of them have given out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had to live on. Again, we're given a story about someone who gives everything. It's astonishing, really, because how many of us do that? You know, we see that the typical average charitable gift among Americans is about 2% of income. And yet we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And so I think the average American is giving a very modest slice compared to these images of generosity that Jesus shares with us. One of the other wonderful stewardship texts, and something that guides us about our money and thinking about money and what we do with it is this wonderful passage from Matthew chapter 6. It doesn't give us a specific procedure or way to go about our giving, but rather gives us a perspective on how we're to view money and use it. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I think as we open our hearts to greater generosity and place our trust in God and maybe take a step forward in our giving, which might not feel super comfortable right away as we make that step up, we find that our heart is following where our gifts are. I've seen this happen as I've worked as a major gift officer with several large Lutheran not-for-profits like Lutheran World Relief, Luther Seminary, and Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota, that as people gave significantly larger gifts, they started paying a lot more attention to what was happening within the mission. They started reading the annual report. They started reading the emails that came out. They started attending events and perhaps hearing what the president of the organization had to say about what the mission was and how we were meeting it, what the challenges were. And donors would often then want to step up even more to help out with that challenge. But there was that interesting sense that as people gave bigger gifts, they were paying more attention. It was an example, I think, of where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Well, I'd like to introduce another wonderful woman to you, Rhonda Templing. I haven't met her personally, but I've talked with her on the phone, and she's a dynamo. Let me just tell you a little bit about Rhonda. She's from Hoisington, Kansas, living on a farm north of that community, and is a member of Emmanuel Lutheran Church. That congregation is part of a consortium of congregations called Seeds of Faith Parish, which has 4 congregations within it. And she is a lay minister working to deepen the laity's understanding of their faith so they can minister more effectively with the gifts God has given them. She's past president of the Central State Synod Women of the ELCA. She's been a board member there, a vice president, a treasurer, and currently she's on the leadership team for Katie's Fund. So Rhonda, thanks for being with us today.
My name is Rhonda Temping, and my faith is very much a part of why I give and how I give and how much I do give. Many years ago, I became very involved in Women of the ELCA in Central States, served as a board member, as vice president, as president, and as treasurer. That gave me a level of confidence all those years of service to this organization that I didn't have before. And because of that, when I had the opportunity to enter the lay ministry program in Central States, I decided to do it. And I took all the classes and prepared myself, really thinking I would just mainly help out at my church and, that sort of thing. Ended up doing supply, and about 8 years ago, I was asked to be co-pastor, I guess is a good word to use, in the parish. And at this point, along with my pastor, I now serve in a 4-point parish. And that means that every Sunday I preach at 2 churches. We exchange off and do that. And I would not have been able to do that if it wasn't for Women of the ELCA. They just built my confidence and gave me lessons in things that I didn't even realize I needed lessons in. because of that, about 15 years ago, my father had recently passed away, and my mom and I sat down and had a talk and decided that we thought it was time we truly lived a stewardship kind of life. And it's not that we didn't give before that and weren't involved, but we just felt differently about it. And so my mother and I started to do that, which basically to me means we gave and really didn't think about it. We not always to the church, but mostly to the church, but to other organizations. And when we were asked, we said yes. And the most interesting thing happened with that. The more we gave, the more we got. And Mom and I would talk about that, how that was working. It was kind of a very interesting thing to observe. My mother has since passed away, and I have continued to live that way. When somebody asks me, can I make a donation? If it's something I have an interest in, and if it's something that I feel good about, I say yes. And it's still happening. The more I give without thinking about it, the more I seem to get. And in fact, I was asked to serve on the leadership team for Katie's Fund 21-22, and I said yes to that. And part of serving on that was I had to make a pledge. And I made that pledge, and I had 3 years to do it, but I decided I wanted to do my pledge in 1 year. And in August, I finished making that pledge. And again, I gave that, wrote those checks, sent them off. And again, the more I sent off, the more I seemed to have. I guess, I don't know if it's a miracle, but it's a very interesting fact about that. I also decided at that point that Katie's Fund and women of the ELCA were put into my will. And that's part of my estate planning. When you truly decide to live with stewardship at the forefront of your life, the most amazing things happen. You always have enough, and you always feel comfortable giving to others. Thank you.
Rhonda, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your life and your faith and your giving, your love for women of the ELCA. It means so much to hear your story. Well, let's take a look now at some teachings that the Bible has for us about saving. Here's a quote from Proverbs chapter 13. The good leave an inheritance to their children's children. I think that's really interesting because here the Bible is calling us to use our money in such a way that we're caring for future generations. I think about that in an ecological sense and think about how are we caring for the earth as stewards so that we can leave it in good shape for our grandchildren. But it also may be that as we have financial resources in our care, that we can be wise about doing some saving and investing so that there is something there that can be passed on to future generations. In my work with donors over the years, sometimes I've heard from some people who want to give all of their money to their children and grandchildren, nothing else. And I don't think that's what this verse is getting at. And I don't really think that that's the wisest way to be a steward. I think we also have to take into account our own current needs within our church and the charities that ask us to contribute, and to find a balanced way to give, save, and spend. But I do think it's fascinating that Proverbs encourage us to think not just about the present moment, but also about future generations. And I think that speaks very directly to having a wise plan for saving and investing. Also, here's another quote from Proverbs chapter 21. Precious treasure remains in the house of the wise, but the fool devours it. And just think how easy it is to blow a big wad of cash. I mean, some people do that if they have a gambling habit, it can just disappear in 5 minutes. But other people may go out and maybe have a huge shopping expedition or a big expensive weekend adventure or trip. And a lot of money can go out the door really, really fast. And I think this is saying, take time to think about it and be sure that there's some that remains. Because one thing that happened again and again in the Bible is the sense of famine. We're aware that there were times of great hardship, even starvation. And I think this phrase, precious treasure remains in the house of the wise, is that sense that we don't want to just quickly spend everything we have, because then we won't have reserves for helping us get through the lean times. So this is just, I think, some Bible verses that can help us build a wise strategy for use of financial resources. Finally, what does the Bible say about spending? Here's a wonderful passage from Matthew chapter 6. Therefore, do not worry, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear? For it is the Gentiles who strive for all these things. And indeed, your heavenly Father knows that you need these things. But strive first for the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. I think it's so comforting to get from this passage that God knows our material needs. I don't think God is expecting us to live a life only of spirit. You know, we live within the earth, surrounded by other human beings, sometimes in places that can be very, very hot or very, very cold. And we need things. We need structures or clothing or umbrellas that can help us be comfortable in those settings. We need food from day to day that helps nourish our body and strengthen us, not only for that day, but the days and months and years to come. God knows these earthly needs and will provide for them. It takes money to be able to purchase the clothing and the groceries and the medical care. So I think this is very comforting in the sense that God will take care of these things and they will be given to us, but strive first for the kingdom of God. Again, there's this reminder that our first thought should be about God and the kingdom of God. And as we put our devotion and our prayer and our focus on God and the kingdom of God, what does that mean for our giving, for our saving, and for our spending? It doesn't mean that we don't do one of those things. We certainly do need to spend, but we need to put God first. When we do that, how does it change the decisions that we make about money? It's something that I think can take a great deal of personal reflection. Well, money can be a hard topic to discuss. There are so many women, especially, who've told me that they feel awkward talking about financial situations with their friends. Well, let's make it easier. I'm hoping that with this series that we're having starting today and lasting over the next 4 Saturdays, that as we address various financial topics, it becomes easier to talk about money. And it also means that we can learn from each other about these matters. When we as sisters in the faith explore financial matters together, we can do it in a way that keeps God at the center. And so I think this is a perfect setting for talking more openly about money. I'd like now for us to have a time to be in small groups. And Linda will be able to form this through Zoom so that you will instantly find yourself in a small group with 2 or 3 other women. We're purposely keeping the group small so that each of you has a good chance to share and answer the questions at hand. I thought of 3 sections of questions for us to go over together in small groups. The first one is, what money practices did you observe in your family as you grew up? And do you follow those today, or have you diverged from the former practices? And if it did diverge, what caused you to make a change? So have fun meeting each other and talking about that. We'll come up on the screen with a few other questions that you'll see running across your screen in a few minutes. But maybe at this point, take about 5 minutes to introduce yourselves to each other and explore those questions that I just laid out for you. Well, I hope you had a great time in your small groups. Let's come back now together as a large group, and I'll offer some tips to you. A plan for money and other financial assets leads to confidence and empowerment. Women in the United States own $10.9 trillion. That's the amount of money in women's direct ownership today. And that number is only going to get bigger as our parents die and leave inheritances to us, or if we happen to be married and we outlive our spouse, we may actually inherit twice. And so a great deal more money will be coming into our hands. And it's such an incredible moment to realize that we have this amazing gift from God that gives us an enormous amount of power in terms of deciding where we want to use our money. How do we want to live out our faith? How do we want to strengthen the church? How do we want to strengthen women of the ELCA? As we realize the tremendous financial power in our hands, we suddenly also realize that we can make a bigger difference than maybe we even thought we could. So I've just got some tips for you today on developing a financial plan. And for a faith-based financial life, that includes giving, saving, and spending. First of all, as we've talked about, put Jesus at the heart of your money plan. And I chose this picture for you on this slide very purposefully. You'll see that there's a glass of wine off to the right and a Bible there. It looks like a wonderful moment. Someone is sitting in front of the fire, really relishing the snapping and crackling of that fire, the warmth of the fire. This is a really wonderful moment. And this is what a donor that I worked with at Luther Seminary set up. She happened to be a board member at the seminary. And as a board member, she felt called to give a stretch gift, to make a sacrificial gift. And she said she wanted to make the moment when she was writing out the check to the seminary really special and celebratory. So she said that she would get out a glass of wine and write out her check. She made it a party as she offered that sacrificial gift to Luther Seminary as a board member. She was giving her time, her talent, and her treasure, and stepping forward in a big way. And I was just so delighted by the fact that she took such joy in it and wanted to mark the occasion with a glass of wine. But I just say this as a reminder to put Jesus at the heart of your money plan. Pray about your giving. Pray about your saving and your spending. If you aren't sure what to do, keep praying. There's someone in my family who is an Episcopal priest. And she said she knew that she needed to give a leadership gift in her congregation's campaign and wasn't sure what it should be. And she kept praying and kept praying and kept praying until the answer became clear to her. And then she was able to give a sacrificial gift joyfully. So just remember, put Jesus at the heart, first of all. Also, know your income flow. And I mention this because it may be that all of your income comes from a single job, part-time or full-time. But there are many women today who receive income from various portions. Maybe there's a part-time job in retirement. Maybe there's Social Security income. Maybe there's an annuity where a payment comes periodically. And maybe a retired woman needs to be taking a required minimum distribution from an IRA account. And so the actual amount of income may be coming from 4 or more sources. So just know your income flow before you make financial decisions. Tally it up and know where your income is coming from and what the total amount you think will be there for the whole year. Also, this is so important. Total all your assets. I've talked with a lot of women who say they aren't really too sure what their net worth is. Part of it is the number keeps changing. You know, if we happen to own a house or a condo or a farm or a vacation home, you know, the price can go up or down over time. And also the amount that's paid off through a mortgage can change, leaving you with more equity in that property. So that's a always changing number. I'd say make sure to check the values at least once a year. And don't forget anything. Maybe you have some certificates of deposit at your local bank. Maybe you have both an IRA and a Roth IRA. And maybe you have some investments that you just own outright that are in another investment account. I just mentioned these as examples. Not everyone has those specific assets, but I mention it because people may have several assets. Also, maybe you don't own a home, but you inherited some jewelry from your grandmother that has a significant value. So just think about what are those things of value and make sure that you do in fact know the total value of your assets minus whatever you still owe. If there's a mortgage that's due for any of those things, or you borrowed in order to buy any of those things. Reduce debt, because we all know that paying off debt is very, very expensive. So just as fast as you can, pay off debt, and especially credit card debt first. As I mentioned earlier in our session, give first fruits. Give to God, which means giving to Christian ministries, off the top, before you decide what you have to save and before you decide what you have to spend. Give it in this order and have fun with it. I think giving is more fun when you do it off the top because you're amazed at the amount that you can come up with when you're looking at the whole 100% and then taking a tithe off the top. Suddenly there's a bigger amount to give, and it's really fun to be able to go out with your gifts and make a difference to your favorite organizations, including Women of the ELCA. Also, set a budget so you know what you can afford. It is so easy to have impulse purchases. So easy. But sometimes they don't fit the budget. And so it is very helpful to know what amount really you can be spending each month on paying for where you live, paying for groceries, paying for medical care, paying for clothing. Those things are really essential needs. You also maybe have childcare, which is an essential need if you have children and you're also working in a job outside the home. And so there are essential needs and then also things that you would like to be able to do with money left over. But again, it's helpful to know what the budget is for all of those categories. Helps you stay on track better. Learn financial terms. And I put my mom's picture on this slide. She became widowed at age 43 very suddenly when my dad died of a cardiac arrest at the age of 51. It was so shocking for all of us. It was devastating, really. My mom was a career woman. She taught full-time as a high school English teacher, and she wrote out checks and even balanced the checkbook. But she never ever met with our family attorney or our family bankers. My dad, as a farmer, had a more flexible schedule. He also knew a great deal more about money than she did. She'd never gotten training in that. She got a lot of training about literature and writing and public speaking, which were wonderful skills. And she carried forward with that as an English teacher and taught those skills to others. But she did not have financial knowledge when my dad died suddenly. And she was terrified. I was in college. She was worried about whether she could afford to keep me in college. She was worried about perhaps having to sell some of our family farmland in order to pay for estate taxes. The law was different back in the 1970s because, yes, as a spouse, there still was estate tax due at that time. She looked worn out and frazzled when I got home from completing my my spring semester of college, in part because of the weight of the financial responsibility. But she took it on like a trooper. She started reading financial magazines. She joined a women's investment club. She met with the family attorney and the bankers because she had to. And she asked questions about what terms meant when she didn't know what they meant. And she learned so much. She later was co-chair of a $3 million campaign to add a wing onto our local Andrew Carnegie Public Library. And she went out and asked people for major gifts. She gained a financial confidence. She made major gifts herself. I'm so proud of the journey that she took, but I'm aware that she had to put a lot of emphasis on learning financial knowledge in order to become more comfortable with those responsibilities that were suddenly in her lap. So we all can do that. We all can be learning financial terms. And meet with advisors. Maybe you already have a financial planner or perhaps an accountant. But if you don't have those people working with you, and if your budget is low, who can help? Who can help you provide more of a financial education? And one wonderful resource I'd like to lift up are the regional gift planners from the ELCA Foundation. Just go on to the ELCA Foundation website and you'll be able to see the list of the financial planners. Well, I guess they're not called financial planners, but advisors who meet with people in your region. And it's free to you to consult with them. And they're able to provide a lot of education and a lot of guidance. It's just a wonderful free resource that we have within the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. In fact, 2 representatives with the ELCA Foundation will be providing the main content for our next session, next Saturday. But meet with advisors, and some other advisors who are available to you include attorneys, but also major gift officers at a wide variety of charities. They're also able to provide some education and guidance and may be able to help you in understanding some things, and also may be able to help you think through what sorts of gifts you would be able to afford to give. So there are a lot of people out there you can access. Also, you can take community education classes on personal finance. I know a wealth advisor who's a member of our congregation who teaches community education classes, and these are very, very inexpensive. She has an MBA and a great deal of experience in the financial world. And I think it's terrific that she's offering that knowledge to the public for very, very low cost through community ed. So it's something accessible for people that you can get for a low cost. And you can form an investment club with women. This is one thing that my mom did that helped her learn a lot more about stocks and how to research stocks. She enjoyed doing it as part of an all women's group. It's something that you could do too. And finally, just read about money and investments. You could pay for some subscriptions to bring things right to your own home, or you can go to your public library and find these resources. But just be sure to carve out some time so that you're accessing materials that can help further your own financial knowledge. And finally, be bold in giving to charitable causes, including Katie's fund. So many women tell me that they feel anxious about money. I think part of it is because they don't really know their net worth. They don't really understand what they can afford to give. So my encouragement to women is learn what you have, then learn more about money in general and about the terms and the concepts. And in this case, the types of charitable gifts that you could give. In fact, we're going to be talking a lot more about that in sessions 4 and 5. One session will be devoted to a wide variety of ways to give current gifts, and another will be devoted to ways that you can set up legacy gifts or estate plan gifts. I'm betting that there are more options out there than you may have heard of already. So it's going to be fun to share that information with you. Once you have the confidence in what you can do, it is fun to be bold in giving and change the world in ways that you want it to be changed. And one of those ways is Katie's fund.
Well, thank you, Jenny. We have some questions in our final few moments together. Here is one. You mentioned about looking towards written resources. Can you name a couple of reliable written resources that women can access that will help them become more financially savvy?
Well, I think just even reading the Wall Street Journal can be very helpful. There are a wide range of business magazines. Fortune magazine is another possibility. I think often women tell me that they don't know the definitions of financial terms. So it helps to just become familiar with things like the phrase stepped up basis in talking about investments or capital gains. You know, some of those terms, some people are very familiar with them and some people aren't. And so I think reading almost any business magazines or financial information that's out there is a way to become more familiar with the terminology.
Mhm. This is an interesting question. If the bulk of your assets are held in a portfolio of stocks and money markets, that type of thing, how do you figure out your tithing?
Well, I heard a really interesting tip from a respected financial advisor in California years ago, and he said that he would counsel his clients calculate what your income is and what your tithe would be at 10% of income, but then total up your net worth and look at what 1% would be of your net worth and give away whatever is larger. And I thought that was such an interesting concept because some women are not the wage earner in the family. If they happen to have a spouse who is earning a larger income or perhaps the only income, the woman herself may not have an income or may only be working part-time. And so whatever she calculates as her tithe may be on a rather small amount of money. And yet this could be someone who has several $1,000,000 in a stock portfolio. So I'd say in that case, don't focus as much on tithing the income, but think about the total asset value and what can be given away year by year, or perhaps committing to a very significant 5-year pledge in a campaign that you truly care about. And I know a lot of women on this call today, women of the ELCA is one of the causes dearest to your heart. And we'll be talking later in the series more about the campaign that's underway, 21-22, to raise funds for Katie's fund. So that's definitely one to keep in mind. But I think the total assets are really important to think about when it comes to charitable giving, not just the income flow.
Okay, thank you. And then I think we have time for one more question, and that is, how do I start a conversation with my family about financial resources and choices? The person says, I've always been rather private about my financial life.
Well, we heard some of that in the small group that I was in about a family who never ever talked about money as this person was growing up. So when that's been the pattern, it can seem like a chasm in terms of how do I get started even with the conversation. Some people invite in an advisor. If you happen to have a financial planner or an accountant or a trust officer at a bank, perhaps even a regional planner with the ELCA Foundation, any of these people may be a good person to bring into the conversation to help guide a family discussion around money. But a simpler version may be simply to think carefully about what are the things you would want your family to know and make bullet points about those. I know as my mother was about to have surgery and was in her early 80s and was worried, she might not make it through the surgery. For the very first time in her entire life, she told me where all of her accounts were, where they were held, what the account numbers were, and what the values were. She said, you need to know this now. And she gave me a little book with all of this information. But, it's also something that could be just saying, I want to have a special meeting with you, set a date and a time, and say, during this time, our agenda is going to be around me sharing with you about my life as a steward. It ties in with my faith. And I want to give you the faith background, and then I'm going to share with you some of the financial background. These are things I want you to know about. It's important to share.
I'm afraid our time's at an end. We need to say farewell for today. But before I say my final goodbye, I'd just like to let you know a little bit about what's coming up next Saturday at 1 p.m. Central, session 2 of our series here on God's Gift of Money. It's going to be terrific. We have 2 wonderful women from the ELCA Foundation who are co-presenting, Cynthia Halverson and also Anna Lugo. They are presenting on Finance 101, a primer for gaining confidence with money. And I've talked today about how important that is. So they'll be talking about terms and concepts, all sorts of things, really covering the gamut. I know you'll want to be with us. I look forward to being your host again next week, and we'll all learn together. Thanks so much for being here today. Bye, everyone.